Last week I did a value study from the picture to give us an idea of where the light and dark patterns were going to be in this, so that when we go to do the actual painting we can sort of balance and figure that out. Now, one situation that I created for myself when I took this deer out of context and switched it from another photograph, the reality is that the light was backwards on this. I've gone in and I've darkened a few things just to remind myself, but I also, in my value sketch here, I went in and I put a little light halo around the deer's bottom because the light is coming in from that direction. You can see it here, and if you look carefully at the beach, you can see that the shadows run from the upper left and work their way down on a diagonal through here, so that they almost follow the edge of that beach as far as what direction that sun's coming. And if you look at the rocks, you can sort of see how the highlights are on that. So from that little piece of information, I can decide how to do this light and dark on the deer himself. So he's going to need a little highlight around his bottom, and the light's going to come in onto the back haunch here a little bit, probably a little bit on this shoulder and on this ear, maybe a little tiny bit of the face there. You'll get a little bit of bounce light from the water coming in up underneath of the deer. So some of this light underneath I don't need to worry about as much, but this really bright light along this side of his neck is in the wrong place. So that's not going to be there. He's going to be dark against a light background. So this next thing that we need to consider, and that is, how do we hold these light spaces in the painting when we go to develop it? Do I put some resist on him to hold him, or what I'm going to do is the alternate, which is we'll put our wash down and then I'll quickly come back in while it's still very wet. It's cool today, so I've got a little bit more working time. I'm going to quickly come back in, and I'm going to, with a tissue, I'm going to lift the light on the back of his bottom, and I'm going to lift the light in these tree areas here, so that, because although I need a little bit of blue under there, I don't want too much blue or the brighter yellow greens are not going to show. So what I'm going to be doing first is a wash throughout this whole painting of a blue, and it's going to vary a little bit because it's lighter here behind the mountains there. I can make it a little bit lighter in that area. I can make it a little bit lighter down in here, but there is blue back in, there's blue reflected into that water all the way down. These greens have blue in them, these greens have blue in them. That deer has blue in it, and we're ignoring this swimming line through there. So a little bit of blue through here is not going to hurt anything. It's going to be actually a very nice, cool color in the back there. But I do want to pick out some of this. I want to have that a little bit warmer there. This beach can have a little bit of blue under it, but not very much. So when I grade it down, I'll make it lighter over in this area. Okay, so then the next thing I want to talk about just a little tiny bit is the drawing. And so I took a sleeve, cut it into quadrants, 4 across, 4 down. Then my paper is the same proportion as this. So if I were to set this in one corner, draw a diagonal through my paper, it would end up very close to this top edge. So I've done the same 4 quadrants in here, vertical and horizontal. And then when I did the drawing, there were some places where I went ahead and kept that drawing in here just so I could see where it was. So the one thing that I've used a ruler for is that horizon, because I want it very straight. And then I found, so here's my halfway mark, here's my halfway mark. That horizon is about halfway between the quarter mark and the halfway mark. And so that's where my horizon went. That was the first thing that I set. And then once I figured that out, then I put the mountain in, I put this hill in, I put this mountain in place, and then I found the rest of these horizon lines in here, and then put in the detail that was going to fit within those pieces. And then the reflections, when they come in, they're going to be directly below whatever they're reflecting. So these trees up here have got to have their reflections straight underneath. So I've actually drawn myself a little line here straight down to remind myself that those are straight underneath. And then something like this that's got a curve, it'll have a curve for a little ways. There'll be, let me pull this out of the way so you can see it a little bit better. So this curve line, I'm actually seeing it, but it doesn't go the whole way. It just comes out a little ways and then starts going straight down. And the further away these are, those things just sort of go straight down. So I'm not really, I'm seeing just a tiny bit of this. Now there's a wind line here too that is keeping this reflection from going all the way to that land. And then there are waves in here that are breaking that reflection. And so they run through on a pattern, and the closer they get to the front, the more they sort of diagonal down. The further away they stay parallel to that horizon back in the back. And then we've got a little bit of a water droplet here. And this is a point of view thing. This is not a straight circle, it's an oval. And so watch that. Pay attention to how much oval there is in that. Colors go straight down, and we now get a little bit of a point at the top of these. Some of them are broken. And how dark this is going to be a little bit darker than what's up there, a little more muted than what's up there. This is actually going to be a little bit lighter. That dark is going to be a little bit lighter than the dark that's up there. And I'm also going to play a little bit with keeping this from being just a solid dark mass and make that so that it's got some variation in there, has some dark places, but other places that are not quite so dark, and maybe show some of those trees in there just a little bit. So that's that. And so that's one reason I've drawn these in. And then, so this is being transferred using a graphite transfer paper, graphite on one side against my page, this on top of it, held into place. And then I like using a ballpoint pen because it gives me a very crisp line. And so my end result, I now have my drawing here with the deer in front. And yeah, he ended up being relatively big here in the corner. That was the size it was in the picture when I really came down to see where those were. It wasn't all the way in that very corner like I was saying in class. It actually was a little bit bigger. So now we've got this. So my decision was I'm not going to do the resist on him. Instead, I'm going to do a lift. Same with over here. I'm not going to do any resist to hold that. I'm going to just do it with a lift. But that's light. This is light. And then the blue is darker up here, gets lighter as it comes in through there, gets a little darker, and then gets a little bit darker up in this corner when there's actually going to be brown in underneath of there, but it's light back in underneath of here. So I'm going to have to vary that a little bit as I do it. So let's go ahead and mix up that blue. Now the question is, what color of blue do we want to do? Cobalt is one of my first go-to sky colors. It's not always exactly the color we want. I'm actually seeing this as a little bit more of a turquoisey blue. Let's get a sheet here where we can look at this. So that's cobalt blue. And phthalo blue, I had some mixed up here. Oh, you know, I need to move this pan over a little further so you can actually see my pan as I'm working. I had a little bit of this phthalo blue mixed up over here for something else. The phthalo blue is, if I mix it into this cobalt, might be just about right. On its own, I think it's too intense. So I'm going to just pick up a little bit of this, put it into that cobalt, mix them together. And that's coming out a pretty nice color. Now, I've got a pretty good size area here, and I also have a cat here floating. The cat was coming around checking out everything I was doing earlier, including picking up one of my sponges and throwing it on the floor. Sweet darling kitty. Okay, I'm going to mix this a bit thicker than what I want, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet that entire page. And then we're going to flood this. And speaking of which, I need my little lift that's not here. A little bit of noise there. The lift, it's about a 1 inch so that it lifts it up just a little bit so I know which way gravity is going to be working on this. I can start with it flat and then put that in as soon as I've got it all wet. I'm going to be using one of my wash brushes. I've got a couple of different ones here. This Robert Simmons 1.5" Skyflow is nice. This is an old Daler Rowney. You don't need, these brands may not even, I think the Robert Simmons is still available, the Rowney is not. But what you want is a nice soft 1 to 1.5" wash brush, flat brush. So we're going to wet this entire page. Once I've got this wet, I've got to look at it sideways and see how, whether I've missed anything. So I want this wet enough that the paint will move on here, but not so wet that it's going to just flood everywhere. So the wetness on this, rather than being so wet that the water will just run off of here, I want it wet enough that there's a sheen, but the water's not running anywhere. So as you play with this, you can sort of look at it and see that. So there's a shininess to this surface, and I need to have that much shininess just to keep it wet while I'm working. Now, where are my dry spots? Here's a dry spot here. Where else is a dry spot? There's too wet. That's way wetter than, and I want that wetness to be pretty even across here. So that's one reason why I'm working this back and forth. And then if I think I have too much water, I can always take and sort of roll it down to one corner. And let's just put this in here because that's going to start it rolling. And then in this corner, take my brush and pick it up off of there. Maybe it's all wet down here at the very bottom. Okay, so now my next thing is to put in that wash. I'm going to use the same brush, and I'm going to start up here in the top of the sky. This is where it's the darkest. So I felt like I had to come back in and add a little bit more paint to that to really get it as dark as I wanted it. And it can go dark in behind that, and it can go right in on this mountain. This all has to be blue, but it's not as dark a blue. And yeah, that's where that is. I can sort of leave that out a little bit there. Have a little bit in underneath of here, but not as much. And I'm going to come back in with a tissue and sort of lift some of that out in a bit. But then we're going to keep on working our way down here. And I said it was darker blue in here because it's going to reflect that dark blue up there. And let's get even a little more dark up at the very top. It is running. So I'm sort of wanting to mimic what I did with that blue up there. And then it's a little lighter in underneath of here, but there is some blue in underneath of here. And there's going to be maybe some light spots on that beach. So let's just not do blue everywhere on that beach. And this is an area where it's a little bluer. And so I don't get marks with my brush. I have to brush all the way across. And make sure there's enough underneath of there, either all the way across or sort of lift and pull my way up out of it. And let's just, I think it's all wet enough that I can do that without a problem. Some light little clouds that are back behind that mountain. Now, with tissue, I rolled a little spaghetti thing of tissue and have that ready before I start. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to press this into the deer, and just staying within my lines because where I press is going to stay dry. And if I do a little too much, it doesn't, as long as I stay in the deer, we're okay. And let's see, that ear is probably going to have a little light on it. Back side of that, back side of that guy. And maybe a little bit of light there. I can sort of pull it along through him just a little bit. And if that paint wants to move back in there, I can come back in and dry again. And then up in here, are we fine? No, I still need to do a little bit more lifting. So this time with a little crinkly tissue, I'm going to come in and just do a little uneven lifting in here. And the edge of that, there's a nice yellow that's there that I don't want to lose. So let's just lift that, and then some of those are going to come down into there. Some of that's going to come down into there. And this is all pretty light. I don't think I'm going to have a problem there. We're going to come in and we're going to do another layer of blue on top of that. Maybe this green up here. Okay. And oh, we said that we didn't want much blue, if any, on top of this little grassy spit. And let's just, I want to keep this sort of an uneven thing so that I can just get some little spots of this lifted. Okay. That's looking pretty, looking pretty. And in here, I think we should just leave this alone at this point. Okay, I do need to just sort of back away. Oops, I have something else that I still need to do here. He's going to go darker. He's going to go darker, isn't he, on those edges? So that's not so crucial, but what is around his bottom. Let's come back in now. This is dried just a wee touch before this dries any further, and just get that dried. It's just the paper's slightly damp, and so it's wanting to work its way back in there. Now there's a point when it's going to dry too much and you won't be able to get anything to happen, in which case you wait and you do this afterwards as a lift with your brush. But right now it was still wet enough that I could lift that off. Okay, I think anything else that needs to be dealt with, maybe right here. Help remind myself that there's a light green in there, and a light green that comes. Oh, okay, so that's the reflection. This is a, yeah, right there. It's a little lighter green, just to remind myself. Okay. That's all dark, and I can't do anything about that little piece of blue right now, but there's going to be some waves that come in here that'll help deal with that. And this is now drying so much that nothing is really going to lift. I do have to stop on this. We're going to go darker against that. So these little spots right here that maybe are uneven, don't have to deal with them. Okay. Turn it off. And then you guys will be able to paint. And I've lost some of my white up in here. Do I care? Probably not. Those are little clouds. If I care, oh, it's too late. I can't do anything about it anyway.